Good afternoon. Thank you very much for attending this webinar today, which brings together our health law group and our pension and benefits group. I'm Laurie Turner. I'm the co-leader of our firm's health law group, and I'm pleased to introduce Ross Gascho, who is the leader of our pensions and benefits group. Before I provide a more detailed introduction of Ross, I would like to advise you that this program is being recorded, and also that a follow-up email will be distributed to participants next week, which will include a link to the recording, the slide decks, and also the CPD information. Also, audience members are invited to ask questions throughout the presentation, and you can do so by submitting a question through the Q&A tab, which is located to the right of your screen. And we'll turn to questions at the end of the presentation, and we'll do our best to get through any of the questions that are submitted. So Ross practices exclusively in the area of pension and employee benefits. He advises clients on all aspects of the implementation, administration, funding, communication, investment, governance, and wind up of pension, group benefit, and profit sharing plans. He also advises on issues in federally and provincially regulated defined benefit and defined contribution plans across both the private and public sectors, and in respect of both union and non-union employees. And finally, Ross is widely recognized for his expertise with respect to pensions and employee benefits law by the Canadian Expert Directory and also by Chambers. So now I am going to turn it over to Ross.
Thanks, Laurie, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm not running the slides myself, so you'll periodically hear me say to Casey Gonzalez, the next slide, and Casey, here's the first one, next slide. Well, you know that you're at a law firm event when the first slide is a disclaimer. And you'll probably be glad that we're not doing this in the room, because otherwise I would probably be running around to each of you asking you to sign a disclaimer and waiver. But in this case, the disclaimer is important. We're going to mention some plans by name today. And just to be clear, we're not endorsing any of the plans that we mentioned. We haven't vetted them for the purposes of this presentation, even though we're familiar with all of them. And in some cases, we act for them or we've been on the other side of them. The decision to have a retirement plan, or for that matter, not to have a retirement plan, is specific to every organization. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. And if your favorite third-party plan is not listed today, that's not a slight against the plan. It's really just, we didn't want to offer you every brand of toothpaste in the supermarket. What we're really trying to do today is identify options. Options for employers that think that they need a plan, but they don't have one, and options for employers that have a plan and are thinking, do they want to make some changes to it? So no matter where you are on that spectrum, there are solutions for you that might be different than what you're thinking about today. Next slide. The starting problem, and it's an excellent one to have, is that the average Canadian is expected to live longer than their human capital is going to run, their ability to work. In other words, what each of us today is capable of is more than what we'll be capable of in 30 or 50 years. There are exceptions to that, of course. Warren Buffett seems to be going strong at 92, and the Queen worked until just a few days before she died, but they're the exceptions. For most of us, the idea of working until we're 85 doesn't sound that great. And even though there are people who say today, yes, they're going to continue working long after retirement, sometimes the realities of aging or their life circumstances change, and they decide that they want to withdraw from the workforce. And of course, there's also the cultural expectation that for the most part, people have a period after work, which they call retirement. Next slide. So the solution is retirement savings. We need either an income or a pool of capital to draw on to support ourselves when we leave the labor force or when the labor force leaves us. And those can be, of course, public or private, public being government funded. Next slide. On the public side, there are well-known programs, the main ones being the Canada Pension Plan, which provides an income-linked, a service and earnings-linked pension. to which virtually everyone, I'm sure, in the room contributes. And there's also old age security, which is not a pension per se, because the eligibility for it is based on how long you've been a resident in Canada. But OAS looks like a pension, and it's often thought of as a pension because it's paid for life. CPP and OAS, even when they're paid in their maximum amounts, are really quite a modest start. If you take them at 65, you're going to, and you're fully eligible, you're going to get about $21,000 a year. If we look at the average income in Canada at around the mid 60,000s, that would mean that they have a replacement ratio of about a third, which isn't enough to carry on the way that you've lived before. And even on an after-tax basis, you're still looking at only about a 50% replacement ratio. Next slide. So the solution is private retirement savings. We need to save to top up the amounts that are otherwise going to be available through public sector programs. As we all know, there are many ways to save. One of the most popular ways to save right now is through home ownership. But houses and condominiums are illiquid assets. You can't just sell part of your house when you need the capital. And there are big transaction costs in selling, as well as lifestyle issues in terms of, well, where do you go next after you've sold? So for our purposes today, we'll focus on the more traditional idea of savings being the setting aside of money, investing it in some sense. And within Canada, the government provides tax assistance on 18% of compensation. That's subject to some dollar caps. In addition, everyone over 18 has the ability to contribute $6,000 a year to a tax-free savings account in which the investment income accrues tax-free, and there's no tax on withdrawal. But study after study shows that saving on one's own is hard. The results at best are variable. For most people, and for most of us in this room, if we just say, well, I'll save the money at the end of the month, we find that the paycheck runs out before the pay period does. There's simply no money left at that point. And even if we do get over that barrier, then there are the next ones, one of which is that individuals face almost overwhelming choice. Do I use RRSP? Do I use TFSA? Do I use both? Do I save after tax? What's best? And then where do I invest? Which financial institution do I use? And what do I invest in? The level of choice in the retail market is almost overwhelming. And if we get over that barrier, then the next one is how much it's going to cost us to do that. Study after study shows that investment fees in Canada are among the highest in the world. Next slide. The solution is employer plans, for the most part. Employers, all of you, have four main options. The first one, of course, is to do nothing. You don't have a plan. In most cases, that's because the organization is particularly cost constrained, something that I know resonates within the healthcare sector, and or the organization really is too small to run its own plan. And that's totally fine, and lots of the organizations do it. The challenge, though, is that it makes your labor force planning much more difficult if people don't have a pool of capital that they're going to be able to go to when they want to or should leave the labor force. The second approach is a structured approach, and this involves making a plan available to employees so that they can get over all of those hurdles that they face as individuals, but they use entirely their own money. There's no employer money involved in that plan. The third option is to incent them to save. And this involves a plan in which there is employer money on the table, and they are incentivized by the design of the plan to put their money into the plan too. And finally, the fourth option is to insist that they save. Make the plan mandatory. Some of those mandatory plans are employer pay all, but some also require employee contributions. Next slide. Well, why are we talking about this now? You've all been around for a long time. Pension and benefit plans have been around for a long time. I've been practicing for over 30 years, and every year in the 30 years, I've been hearing and reading about pending changes in the labor force, that there will be a labor shortage, largely because of the baby boom retiring. And that is now happening. Those pundits were not wrong. Within healthcare, healthcare has been uniquely hit by the pandemic because healthcare, of course, has been a much more difficult place for employees to be during the pandemic. And so the rate of attrition in some healthcare employers has been much higher than it has in other sectors of the economy. The result is attraction and retention are major issues for healthcare providers. For employers, they've got two choices. They have either their own plan, whether it's defined benefit or defined contribution, or they go to an alternative plan in which a third party provides the plan and the employer is merely participating in it. If you're providing your own plan, you have a lot to do. For those of you who have plans, you know that you have a lot to do. In addition to designing the plan and, of course, contributing to it, you have investment, administration, communication, and governance to deal with. Next slide. Now, for those of you who have plans of your own, and or you're thinking about setting up your own plan, our purpose today is not to dissuade you from setting up a plan or carrying on with your plan. In many cases, the employer's own plan is the best solution for the organization, and there are lots of reasons for that. Those of you who have plans will know your own reasons, but these can include flexibility in design, the need to brand the plan with the organization's name. You may have, given your workforce composition, you may have members for whom an off-the-shelf plan is simply not going to work. And you may have other programs that it's necessary to tie your retirement plan to. If you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed by running a plan, there are also all sorts of things that you can do. Both plan providers, which in DC plans are largely life insurance companies, and consulting firms, they constantly amaze me with what they're able to come up with to suit a particular client. So very often the better solution is the one that's in front of us or a phone call away. The two most common tweaks that we see to existing plans are to outsource the day-to-day administration to a third party, usually a life insurance company or a consulting firm, or what I call OCIO programs, outsourced chief investment officer programs. Those are programs in which somebody else takes on the responsibility of choosing investments for your plan, whether that's DB or DC. Next slide. When you have your own plan, so it's an employer-sponsored plan, you as the employer have legal responsibility for it. If, for example, you are the sponsor of a pension plan, whether it's DB or DC, and you are also the named administrator of that plan, you have all of the legal liability attached to that plan. You might outsource some or much of the functions of the plan, but you still have legal liability for your service providers. And if you provide an RSP, or if you're for profit sharing plan or a tax-free savings account, the law is less clear on what your liability is for your service providers. But we generally advise clients to at least think and act as if they have liability for their providers. Now, when you move to a third-party plan, you're getting somebody else not only to do the work, but to also take responsibility and liability for the work. Just because you move to a third-party plan does not mean that you as the employer are off the hook. You can't, for example, just put all the plan names on the wall and throw a dart at them. And you can't just automatically pick the plan that your brother-in-law works for. There's still an obligation as an employer to act in good faith in selecting a plan for your employees. And of course, as a commercial matter, you want to find a plan that fits really well with your organization and your employees. And relatedly, you also want to know how the plan is doing. You wouldn't pick a dental plan and just say, well, now we'll just pay premiums and never find out how the plan is doing. You want to be able to hear back from any third-party plan how they're doing and see if does this still work for us. Next slide. When we talk about third-party plans, most of the plans that we're going to talk about today are pension plans. So in those, a third party is the legal administrator of the plan for pension standard purposes and tax purposes. Your organization's role is as a participating employer. So usually that comes down to determining who's eligible among your employees to join. You'll have some role in enrollment, and of course, you'll probably be making contributions as well. Everything else, the basic design of the plan, investment, administration, and governance are left to the third party. So as I said, it's a little bit like picking a dental plan, but of course more complicated as well, because what one group of employees needs isn't the same as what another group of employees needs. So it's a more complicated selection process, but you really are trying to pick a third party that best suits you and your employees. Next slide. Within the health sector, there's one very well-known pension plan. That's the Healthcare of Ontario Pension Plan. Some of you will know it by its previous name, the Hospitals of Ontario Pension Plan. And that's in some ways a more accurate name, because in order to join, you have to be a member of the Ontario Hospital Association, which many employers are, but not everyone. And if you don't have a plan right now and you're eligible to join HOOP, HOOP is a big financial commitment. It's a fairly traditional defined benefit plan that has a good sized contribution rate for both employers and employees. Next slide. I'm going to talk first about defined contribution third-party plans. Third-party defined contribution plans. So these are plans in which your contribution, your member's contribution is fixed, and the contributions go into an account balance that's invested, and the member's entitlement at the end of the day is to the account balance. There's no guarantee of a promised pension. Third-party DC plans have existed for a long time, and they've usually been sectoral, and sometimes in sectors that we don't think of. For example, credit unions have a fairly large defined contribution plan, as does the long-term care sector. YMCA, just down the street from just about all of us, I think, has a very large DC plan for all of its member organizations, as do the National Hockey League and the Canadian Football League. In each of those cases, there's a board of trustees that is responsible for everything in the plan, except, of course, for getting the members in and making contributions. So the employer choice then is, do we join or don't we join? If it's a DC plan that's provided by a union, the decision to join or not join is usually determined in collective bargaining and then built into the collective bargaining agreement. Next slide. The new plans that we're going to be talking about, or that I am talking about, really have a grandparent, and that is pooled registered pension plans, or PRPPs. If you follow the pension space, and I'm going to guess that many of you don't, but if you have over the last 10 years, you'll know all about these and the political impetus for them. There was considerable pressure on the federal government about 10 years ago to expand the Canada Pension Plan, to make it more generous and to have higher contribution rates. And the federal government's political answer was something called pooled registered pension plans, which are defined contribution plans that are available to employees and self-employed individuals. PRPPs are a little bit different than other pension plans in that we can't just go out and create one and file an application to be registered. You actually have to get a license in order to provide a PRPP. And there are numerous tests and qualifications that have to be met in order for the license to be granted. It's a defined contribution plan. The administrator has to invest the funds in members' accounts in a way that a reasonable and prudent person would do for a portfolio of investments in a retirement savings plan. The plan may or may not allow investment choice. If it does allow investment choice, there have to be varying degrees of expected risk and return that, again, are appropriate for retirement plans. And one of the legislative requirements is that a PRPP has to be low cost. Well, what's low cost? They use as their benchmark, and this is built into legislation, that it has at least as inexpensive as a defined contribution plan that has 500 or more members. From a legal perspective, a participating employer in a PRPP is not liable for the acts or omissions of the administrator. So that's really what we're trying to get to when we move to a third-party plan. And in the case of PRPPs, that is baked in by statute. But you'll see on the slide that I question whether PRPPs are absentee grandparents. I say that because PRPPs are hard to find. Some licenses have been issued, but they have not had a meaningful take-up rate. And I think that's sort of an indication that there's something in them that employers don't like. And there may be issues around how they've been marketed. I just don't know. It's one of the abiding mysteries within the pension bar. Next slide. So let's get to the newcomer DC plans. The first one, and I'm doing these in alphabetical order so that no one thinks I'm trying to put one forward versus the other. The first one is called the Blue Pure Retirement Plan. Blue Pure was established by a longtime pension lawyer. It is a defined contribution multi-employer plan. So multi-employer in this context means that the employers who are eligible to participate in the plan don't have to be related for corporate purposes. So General Motors and Ford are both eligible to participate in the Blue Pure plan. And as a condition of being a multi-employer plan, it has to have 50-50 joint governance between employers and members. In terms of the design, the contribution rates for a given employer and who's eligible to join, those are all set out in a participation agreement. And Blue Pure is interesting and different from many employer plans in that all investments go into a single target date fund, something that we're going to see that is common across all of these alternative third-party plans. And I'll talk in a minute why I think that is. Next slide. The next, and this is the non-pension plan in this discussion, is through an organization called Commonwealth. Commonwealth does not provide a pension plan per se. It uses group RRSPs and group tax-free savings accounts. All contributions go into BlackRock target date funds, and your contribution goes to whichever fund is closest to your retirement age. So the idea of a target date fund is that the asset mix becomes more conservative as the individual approaches a normal retirement date, which they're usually set at 65. The idea being that you're trying to get to less volatility. The traditional way of doing that is to reduce the level of equities in the plan. It'll be interesting to see, not just for Commonwealth, but for anybody who provides a target date fund, what they're doing and what they're going to do, given that in 2022, both equities and bonds have performed as badly as the other. So the traditional safe haven has been just to move from equities into more bonds, but that doesn't seem to work this year. So more to follow on that as a market development. Commonwealth has an interesting wrinkle in that they recognize that when you're in a defined contribution plan, it's really not about your account balance. It's about how much income can you generate from that account. Because I think we might want to be able to control investments when we're, say, 65, but when we're 85 and our faculties might not be quite as sharp as they were, we may no longer want to run investments. At that point, it may be more attractive just to have a guaranteed stream of income coming in. So their solution is a member at any time can take some or all of their account balance and use it to buy a deferred annuity that will be payable in retirement. They have an arrangement with Brookfield Annuity to do exactly that. So whether it's $1 or $1 million that you're using to buy an annuity, that's available. And Commonwealth also has opportunities for members to stay within the Commonwealth family after termination or retirement. Next slide. The next one is called the Ideal Canadian Pension Plan. And the Ideal Canadian Pension Plan comes from a boutique actuarial consulting firm called Robertson Eady. Like Blue Peer, it's a defined contribution multi-employer plan, and it has a twist as well. Like Commonwealth, their focus is not so much on contribution rates and account balances as it is on how much are we going to get out of this? How much income can be generated in retirement? And so they have something that they call benefit targets. What is your benefit target? The employer selects its own benefit target, and its contributions are determined from there. And then members may want a higher benefit target, and the plan offers 4 additional benefit targets that members can fund with their own contributions. Like our previous plans, there's no investment choice per se. Each of the benefit targets has its own fund. So if you're in all 5 of the benefit targets, you're going into 5 funds in total with no control over choosing those funds. And in terms of decumulation, the Ideal Plan intends to use variable pay life annuities when they're finally available through the tax system. Variable pay life annuities essentially allow a group, and so it might be everybody who retires this year, to pool themselves together and create a stream of annuity from that, with the mortality experience of the group being specific to it, as opposed to, say, the book of a life insurer. So that's, I think, an interesting decumulation option from the ICPP. Next slide. The final of the DC plans is an organization called Link Investments. I hesitate to call it a defined contribution multi-employer plan because that's an Ontario term. The pension plan itself is registered in Alberta. The specific Alberta term is non-collectively bargained multi-employer pension plan, bit of a mouthful or more of a mouthful. Link is interesting as well. It takes a different approach to investments. Again, there's no choice per se. A member can choose, the only choice is, do you want the target date fund or, and I think the big attraction of it is that Link has a very detailed questionnaire that members fill out that's about not just them, but also about their spouse. It tries to get a very full picture of who the individual is from a financial perspective. And then an algorithm determines a custom asset mix for that individual, including what exchange traded funds the plan will invest in on behalf of the member. So it's a way of giving choice without, or creating something that's quite customized without forcing members to go through the agony of trying to choose their investments. So, and as I said, if someone doesn't want to go through that process, they go into a target date fund. So why do all of these plans have a feature where there's very limited investment choice? It's like investing at retail. People are paralyzed by choice. If you walk into a supermarket for the first time and just look at the array of toothpaste, where there are 17 different sub-brands for Crest, Pepsodent, etc., it's very confusing. You read fund descriptions, every fund sounds amazing. You look at the quants of the funds, they all seem to be doing well. What do you do? And the result for most people on the investment side is paralysis. They don't know what to do. And so in many cases, they don't do anything. And that means that the default fund of any plan, or what's the default otherwise, they might end up in cash. In an employer plan, they might end up in a money market fund or in a target date fund. But people are just not good at making this kind of choice. So their theory seems to be that if they narrow down the choice or or offer no choice whatsoever, that the outcomes will be better. Let's go to the next slide. Now we come to the defined benefit plans. that are provided by third parties. Third-party DB plans, like third-party DC plans, they've existed for a long time. They're most notable in the public sector, who comes up again, Ontario Teachers, OMERS. So these are third parties that are providing pension plans for the employees of their constituent organizations. There are also lots of DB plans in the private sector already that are third-party plans, but they're provided through unions. A union may negotiate that an employer will participate in its multi-employer plan as a condition of the collective agreement. Next slide. Now, some of you are saying defined benefit. Oh no, let me out of here. Defined benefit plans have a bad name, at least in the private sector. It is true that they provide predictable income. That is their wonderful feature. They also do great things like pool mortality risk and pool investment risk. But they are criticized primarily on two grounds. They are expensive and they are volatile. The expense of defined benefit plans is driven in large part by interest rates. And as you know, in the last 20 years, interest rates have done nothing but go down, except for that little blip that we've seen recently. And so the cost of providing a dollar of benefit has gone up. Cost is inversely related to interest rates. They are also criticized as being volatile. And in the private sector, that's true because of private sector accounting rules. In traditional private sector defined benefit plans, the benefit is fixed and it's guaranteed. The result is that the employer's cost of the benefit is constantly changing. And as I said, as interest rates have gone down, the cost of the benefit has gone up. What the alternative plans do is turn that paradigm around. They offer fixed, or as close to fixed as they can, contribution rates, but they treat the benefits a bit differently. They are all jointly sponsored pension plans, or JSPP. JSPP is an Ontario-specific term that requires a number of things in order for a plan to be a jointly sponsored pension plan. They have to have joint governance, hence the name. 50-50 employer-member representation on their board of trustees. They also have to have 50-50 cost sharing. Historically, public sector plans often had the employer paying more than the employees, so they try to address that by requiring 50-50 cost sharing. Any deficit that arises in a JSPP has to be jointly shared between the employer or the employers and the members. Benefits, once the benefit is accrued, the plan cannot reduce the benefit except if the plan is wound up. And they are not subject to solvency funding. Traditional defined benefit private sector defined benefit plans have to fund on a couple of bases. One of which assumes that the plan is going to be wound up as at the valuation date, and can it settle the benefits in full at that date. JSPPs are not subject to that. They're funded only on a going concern basis, which assumes that the plan continues. That's probably a realistic expectation in the public sector. And JSPPs are not subject to Ontario's Pension Benefits Guarantee Fund, or the PBGF as it's known. The PBGF is an insurance-like fund that provides a limited top-up to pensions in the event that a sponsored employer is unable to pay the deficit on wind-up. Now, as I said, the JSPPs have a different approach. They try to crystallize the contribution and keep the benefit a little bit variable. But of course, no one really wants to announce a reduction in benefits. So they tend to be very conservatively funded so that they don't have to reduce benefits. So that even in a market like what we've seen in 2022, where there has been no safe place for an investor to hide, that there are no cuts to benefits. So that brings us to the first of the plans, CAT-DV+. CAT is an acronym. It stands for the Colleges of Applied Arts and Technology. This is the pension plan for historically for community colleges. It dates back to 1967. It's been around for quite a while, and it added a new component to the plan a few years ago that it calls DB+. DB Plus is open to part-time employees of the college sector. They have a sort of different geographic and economic profile than do full-time members. But it's also open to any other employer in Canada. And it's interesting because of its simplicity. The employer selects a contribution rate for both it and its employees. That can range from 5 to 9%. And the benefit is simply 8.5% of contributions on the member's behalf. So if an employer and its employee each contribute $10,000 this year, the employee is going to be entitled to a $1,700 pension for life starting at age 65. Now, that's great if you're an old person like I am, but if you're, say, 25 or 30 and you're being told, well, you've got $1,700 payable starting at age 65, you say, well, that's not great. That the value of that is going to erode. So CAT offers indexing to that benefit during the period prior to retirement and again after retirement. The interesting thing is that the indexing is not guaranteed. It's conditional on the plan being able to afford it. And they've been able to afford it. At the end of last year, they were 124% funded, again on a going concern basis. They're big, as I said, $18 billion in assets, and CAT has the gold star for investment returns among public sector plans. It has the highest 10-year return at 11.1%. Next slide. The next is something called OP Trust Select. OP Trust is the OPSU Pension Trust, which historically was the pension plan for most of the unionized employees of the Ontario government. It added a new component a few years ago as well that it calls Select. Select is truly selective. It's available only to nonprofits and charities. Now, we mention it here because many of you are structured as nonprofits, so you're eligible to join. OP Trust Select requires each of employers and employees to contribute 3% of the employee's earnings. The employer pays an additional 0.2% in the first 2 years because, of course, there are costs in onboarding new employers. The benefit is 0.6% of this 0.6% of annualized pay for each year of service. Again, like CAT, indexing is available pre-retirement and post-retirement, and it's conditional on the plan being able to afford it. And OP Trust is big. At the end of last year, they had about $25 billion in assets, with an 8.9% tenured find position. But in 2020, they reported being 114% funded on a going concern basis. Next slide. The final plan that I'll talk about is a newly announced plan called the Medicis Pension Plan. This is brought to you by Scotiabank and a company called MD Financial, which is the wealth management firm for physicians, and it's also owned by Scotiabank. It's a defined benefit plan, but it's a multi-employer pension plan. So what's the difference, first of all, between multi-employer plans and jointly sponsored pension plans? Like a JSPP, there's no coverage for the Pension Benefits Guarantee Fund. There's no requirement to share deficits between employers and employees, but it does require 50-50 joint governance, but it does not require solvency funding. It does require solvency funding. So it's unlike a JSPP in that it does have that sort of additional test that applies to it. And with respect to accrued benefits, multi-employer plans can reduce accrued benefits at any time, whether the plan is ongoing or terminated, as opposed to a JSPP, where they can only be reduced on wind-up. In practice, of course, no plan administrator wants to reduce benefits at any other wind-up. And I talked about the conservative funding that goes into plans of this nature. Medisys is interesting, though. It's open only to physician employers. If you're a clinic and you employ and you have physicians on staff who are your employees, they are eligible, as are you. And if you're a physician whose practice is incorporated through a professional corporation, your corporation and you are eligible to participate. This is the Cadillac of the third-party plans. The employer contributes 18% of each member's earnings. That's subject to an earnings cap of about $171,000. And the benefit is a whopping 2% of annual earnings for each year of service. Again, the indexing is conditional as it is in the JSPPs. And part of and none of the plans have said this, and we're just using publicly available information about each plan. But it seems that there's some human psychology in terms of indexing not being guaranteed. And that is that people, if they think they're going to get something and then they don't get it, it's taken away, the benefit is reduced, they react very badly to that. Whereas if people think they might get something and they don't get it, their reaction isn't nearly as bad. So just from a human psychology perspective, and we'll ignore all of the actuarial issues in whether a benefit is guaranteed or not, it sort of makes sense that the members have to go along for the ride as to whether the indexing is going to be granted or not. And I would leave it to all of you, if you talk to any of these plans, to explain why indexing isn't guaranteed. Next slide. So finally, if you're looking at third-party plans, the first consideration is making sure that the design fits your organization. What works best? Is this a cost-effective design for the benefit that it's providing? Of course, that's an issue in any defined benefit plan. Does this cost for this benefit make sense given who we are? The second is, what's your selection process? As I said, you can't just throw a dart at any of these plans and say that's it. As an employer, you're subject to an ongoing duty of good faith, and this is going to cost a lot of money in the long run. You want to give it the kind of due diligence that you would give to any other arrangement that's going to have a lot of your money going into it, and more importantly, a lot of your members, or a lot of your employees' money going into it. So the due diligence process that you bring to it is going to be significant. So that's one legal issue. The second legal issue where you're going to deal directly with the plan is, what am I getting into? What does your participation agreement look like? And there are various issues that participation agreements present. First is, what's the lock-in period? How long must we stay in this plan, even if we don't like it, before we can leave? Relatedly, if we do leave, what are the consequences? Is there any cost to us as the employer if we leave? Is there anything that's going to affect the members? So for example, are their benefits going to change in any way if we stop participating in the plan? If it's one of the defined benefit plans, you need to understand, are the contributions truly fixed? Are the benefits truly fixed? I've tried to give a very high-level overview of how the plans work, but these get into nitty-gritty issues of when can they be changed, if ever. The related issue around change is, what if the law changes? What do we do then? What might this look like? So for example, in a JSPP, currently the law says benefits can't be reduced except if the plan is wound up. But if, for example, the law changes and it says, oh, benefits can be reduced anytime, just like a multi-employer plan, what does that mean for your participation in the plan? Do you want it out at that point? Will your members want it out? That's going to be another consideration. So those are just some very high-level thoughts in terms of thinking about third-party plans. But as I said, a third-party plan is not going to be right for everyone. There is incredible ingenuity brought to retirement plans every day. If you're feeling overwhelmed with an existing plan, there are probably things that you can do that will make your life easier. So there's something for everyone, is the upshot. And that's the extent of the formal remarks that I wanted to make. I'd like to thank our tech people, Alex and Mark, for dealing with us and They know that I'm an introvert, as are all pension lawyers, and they encouraged me to stand facing the camera today, which I thought was good. And from what I can see, Laurie's eyes are still open, which means the Scotch tape I gave her for her eyelids was very successful. And so I'll turn it over to Laurie. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. That was fantastic. Thanks, Ross. There was a few questions that came in, and we still have a bit of time. So the first question is, do the defined benefit plans that you mentioned accept the assets and liabilities from an employer's existing defined benefit plan?
Well, that's a great question. In some cases, they do. And so if you have an existing defined benefit plan and you say, we just want to be out of the pension business, we just want to move all of the liabilities over to a third-party plan, it is possible. Now, doing that is a major exercise. It requires regulatory approval, and there are significant issues to work through around the terms on which that is going to take place, as well as at what price is it going to take place. Each plan will have its own approach. And I don't know if Medicis would allow, for example, a physician who has an IPP, an individual pension plan, to transfer that plan in. I simply don't know. Laurie, I understand that I'm going to pick up a question from the Q&A, and that the first one is whether the Blue Peer contribution rate has to be the same for all employers. My understanding is that it does not, that one of the things that the employer gets to pick is what the contribution rates are going to be, both for itself and for its members. Indexing, there's a question about indexing as well. What's meant by indexing before and after retirement? Excellent question as well. As I said, if you're 25 and you accrue, in my example, a benefit of $1,700 that's payable at age 65, the value of that is going to erode because of inflation over that following 40-year period. And so what the plan is able to do is say, we will increase that $1,700 by some measure. Usually they measure it as the increase in the average industrial wage as reported by Stats Canada. So if for next year, if you accrue a $1,700 benefit this year, and next year the average industrial wage increases by 5%, the plan can increase your accrued benefit by 5% to, I think that would be $1,785 per year. And then again, and that can happen all the way from the date of the initial accrual all the way to retirement. And retirement is measured as when do you start your pension. So then when you start your pension, the same thing applies, that the plan is able to increase, now it's in pay to you because you're retired, the plan is able to increase the amount that's payable to you, again, by a measure. And the measure is usually reflected by reference to the increase in the consumer price index. And the plans use differing formulas, but I think all of them pertain to what the increase in the CPI is. So CPI goes up again by 5%, and the plan provides full CPI indexing. The pension in pay would go up by 5% as well. There was another question about Commonwealth and whether it is the only one in the discussion today that's not a pension plan. If I remember all of the slides correctly, yes, it is the only one. And as I said, I was only using publicly available information for this presentation. Who knows what they have in the works? Maybe they have a pension plan in the works as well. That may well be.
Great. There's a few other questions. So with respect, again, to the defined benefit plans, are members able to purchase prior service with their employer, even if the employer was not participating in the plan?
So thanks, Laurie. So to break that question down a little bit, let's suppose that my employer joins the plan in 2022. But I've worked for the employer for 10 years. Prior to that, I've got all of that service with the employer. They didn't have a plan until that point. Can I now pick up that 10 years of service with the new plan that we're in? And the answer is generally yes. The alternative DB plans, and I would want to double check this on Medisys just because it's so new. But certainly CAT and OP Trust allow members to do what they call a past service buyback. And that generally entails using RRSP assets by the member. They are transferred into the pension plan in order to provide a pension for those prior years of service.
Great. And then currently the last question that we have is, in the defined contribution plans that you mentioned, are members able to move existing pension assets into those plans?
Okay, so this is sort of a defined contribution version of can I buy past service? Again, the answer is generally yes. So if you have, say, assets sitting at Friendly Financial Institution in your RRSP, and now your employer has joined one of the DC plans, generally you're able to transfer those assets if you wish. And then of course it's subject to all the terms and conditions of the new plan. If they are assets that came out of a prior pension plan, so now they're in what's called a locked-in retirement account, if you move them again, they're still going to be locked in. So you can't use one of these plans as an attempt to unlock the money and just take it in cash.
Great. And then one of the questions is that just came in. We would like to get more elaborate information on a certain plan. With whom should we connect?
I would suggest going directly. I've given you some websites, and I realized that I didn't give you the websites for the DB plans. I've given you the websites for the DC providers, and in the email that goes out after this, we'll give you the websites for the DB plans as well. And of course, we're always happy to help, but I think that the plans can speak for themselves. We're not here as brokers to put them forward.
Great. Is there any other questions, or just give it a minute for any other last questions to roll in?
Laurie, you're inviting domestic disasters at my house. You know, I'm waiting for the doorbell to ring or a dog to bark. So far, so good.
Good. Okay, so I think that's it. So again, Ross, thank you so much for that presentation today. It was really great. As a reminder, a follow-up email next week, and you'll get not only this recording, but also a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, the additional links that were mentioned, and also the CPD information. Just to mention that this is the first webinar in our FASCN Health Law series. So please stay tuned and check your emails in the coming weeks for information on subsequent sessions. Our next session is going to be in October, and it's going to focus on some significant changes to telemedicine and the provision of telemedicine services, particularly in Ontario, where there's been a lot of recent changes, but also across Canada. So thank you again, everyone. We really appreciate you joining us today, and we will see you at the next seminar.